We'll call to order this meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission Joint Conceptual Workshop for Thursday, September the 26th, 2024. We'll start off, we've got two items of business tonight. The first will last us an hour, and then we'll follow with a discussion on an amendment to the Envision Franklin Plan with a target to wrap up at 6:30. So we will start. This is a zoning ordinance update. We'll discuss state law changes, best practices, and some floodplain map updates. So I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight's discussion rounds out the topics for the zoning ordinance update. Over the summer, we've covered topics from Bowman Planning Commission members, Envision Franklin related updates, modifications of standards and variances, and tonight we'll focus on some state law changes that are required for our zoning updates based on those laws, and some best practices that staff has identified to see if there's interest in adding those into the zoning ordinance. So we'll go over those one by one, and then the required FEMA floodplain map updates. So here is an overview of the state law changes. It involves a maximum review and approval timeframes for telecommunication towers. We already are well under those maximum timeframes. Annexation and rezoning changes related to the timing of the public notification in the paper from 15 days to 21 days, so you'll see that update. Privately owned landfills or solid waste facilities require BOMA approval, which has already been addressed by a BOMA resolution, but this codifies it into the zoning ordinance for clarity. And then one case law change from the Knight v. Metro Nashville case for sidewalks. This is a really complex case. So in a nutshell, it establishes that cities need to clearly delineate that single-family lots, individual lots for building permits, can't require sidewalks to be installed. It also laid out that there has to be an existing or planned sidewalk nearby for cities to be able to require sidewalk installation. So what this does is give an exemption for small development of single-family residential that's 6 lots or less, that's on an existing street, that is outside of a 5-minute walk to an existing or planned sidewalk. Our law department is supportive of this amendment to meet the recent case law, and so that's kind of where we are on that. Are there any questions about the law updates?
And that's only residential, doesn't have any implication of, like, I'm thinking about the commercial piece that we put across from the Vulcan over there, that little node there and sidewalks there. So it doesn't include retail or commercial, just residential.
The case was specific to a single-family residential building permit.
Who determines the 5-minute walk?
It's a standard in traditional neighborhood development, and we have it in other places in our ordinance. It's 1,320 feet.
Thank you for that clarification.
Kelly and I raise. Okay, on to best practices. Yes. So these are some best practices that we'll go over. We're bringing these forward to see if there's consensus and interest to add these to the zoning ordinance. There are several uses that we'll go over one by one, and some additional flexibility for infill development to promote that in existing shopping centers. And then we're also doing some things for the hierarchy and organization of 2 or 3 of our chapters to take things from subsections to sections. So essentially it makes it easier to define from the chapters, and it makes it more user-friendly. So you can see a fuller list without having to scroll through the pages on a couple chapters. So moving through one at a time, rural retreats is first. The city's seen some recent requests and inquiries about hospitality uses that don't really neatly fit into the hotel category. They're a little broader, they're out in other areas, not necessarily in commercial areas, they're around. There's an example that's South Hall Farm and Inn down West Main, and it seems to be a trend. So Williamson County has what's called a rural retreat, and it has zoning rules about them. And so we're bringing those forward to see if you all are interested in incorporating something like that into the city's ordinance. We'd anticipate that this use would be in the list of potential permitted uses in the PD or planned district. So anything like this would come forward as part of a development plan review with ample opportunity for public input, since these types of uses can have more impact in adjacent areas.
I have a different slide.
Yep. Yeah, if I could just make a quick comment to staff, when we initially are looking at this as a PowerPoint, we can't see all the bullet points. But if
Really?
if you'll download the document and open it as a PDF, then you can see everything that you're reading on the screen.
That's what I was just saying, you couldn't see it.
So download it, open it in the folder, and then open the PDF.
Open it in what?
You hit the download button, and then you have to say PDF. It's this little arrow down there. And now go over here.
Yes.
So rural retreat, it's a design, that would be another land use like a village green, rural reserve. This would be another, or this is a type within one of those land use?
Well, it's not necessarily related. It would be a use type, like a hotel, but a little broader. So this would have a minimum acreage requirement. It allows guest accommodations, but it's a little broader than just a building with keyed rooms with one
You have to go
internal
find it.
corridor. It just provides a little more
Let's see.
flexibility to have different types of buildings, if there's campsites or RV parking areas. Just some different types of guest accommodations that we're
You have to open
seeing there is an interest for.
There you go.
So this is just a use update, we would not apply this to any parcel. This is just a possible use, acceptable use within the current zoning ordinance. Adding an additional use.
Yes, they
Okay.
would be adding a new use
Okay.
called rural retreat to the list of possible uses in the permitted use table by zoning district. And then it would go in with a half moon dot, so there would be additional regulations for this use listed out generally on the screen that would be in the PD district only, is what staff is proposing, so that it goes through the development plan review process. Both the planning commission and the board have input into that, and it's ultimately a BOMA decision as part of a development plan approval.
I can see 20 acres might be a good minimum in the county, but I wonder if the 20-acre minimum is maybe too much if it were within the city.
The way that we're kind of thinking about this is that it would be a minimum of the overall development, not necessarily just the hospitality type use. That's the way that we're seeing them being requested and
Okay.
talked about, is that they're part of a broader project. And so those minimums are really the larger total development site.
Gotcha.
Other questions?
So is there interest in adding this use type?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, you're getting inquiries and
It's gonna be a thing.
yeah, yeah.
The next is live-work units. We have these in Envision Franklin, but we don't have a specific use type in the zoning ordinance that addresses these. And there are some really specific requirements in the building codes that relate to this particular use. And so really what we're proposing is just to codify those in the zoning ordinance so that applicants can see those earlier on in the process versus waiting till they get to the building permit stage and then it potentially being a surprise. So we're proposing that that gets included, and that would also be a use in the planned district going through the development plan process as well. Would you all like that
Any
to
other
be-
questions? Yes.
Would you
Alderman.
be able to, this is a live work, would you, the short-term vacation rental potential of the upper or lower, I guess, depending on where the work 50% is, the non-residential, would that be eligible for short-term vacation rental? Or is that,
That would not,
because you have to live principally on the site?
because the live work is very specific to the same person living there as operating their business on the first floor.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Is the
Go ahead.
assumption that the work area would be on the first floor with the residential above?
The work area has to be on the first floor according to the building codes.
Okay. We have a,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question on the last bullet point where it says not more than 5 non-residential workers or employees are permitted to occupy the non-residential area at any time. I'm thinking about parking. Any details or thoughts on that?
We'll need to address that in the parking standards as well, if this comes forward. All of our uses are also in the parking table with specific requirements for that use based on the demand. And so we would address that in there as well. This is really it's a great question. We're really trying to figure out if you all would like us to add this in. It does provide more clarity when there is one, because they are permitted through the PUD process, through a planned district, but this helps codify that and just lay out all the rules that are applicable to it.
are there any areas in town that are presently using something similar to this? Maybe at West Haven or Berry Farms? I know there are areas where there are commercial facilities on the ground floor, but residential above.
There are, if you look back at West Haven, there are examples, but they came under different building codes at different times, and so those are more flexible in their uses than what a live work for the building code actually allows today.
Okay. Because it seems under perhaps that older code, that there wasn't necessarily a relationship between an operator of a commercial facility on the first floor and a person who rents an apartment above,
Yeah.
something like that.
And there are mixed-use buildings. This doesn't impact mixed-use buildings that have commercial on the ground floor and they're just tenant spaces and apartments or lofts on the second floor that are lived in by somebody else. This is really specific to this type of use that's been brought forth lately to us, but there are very specific rules about it in building codes. So this is just trying to make sure that everybody knows those rules on the front end.
I think spelling it out makes sense. I know that development that came through that was on Cool Springs and McEwen, I think they had some of these type units suggested in there. So I don't know. I think the more you spell it out, kind of makes it more accessible for these things to exist.
Other questions or comments on this one?
Okay, so we'll plan on bringing that forward.
Okay.
Next is microbreweries and craft distilleries. These are common uses in general with restaurants as an accessory part of that use. when they're larger scale, they start to fall into the light industrial use category. So we're bringing forth the idea to add some clarity on what accessory is to help our building and neighborhood services interpret and enforce the ordinance and just provide clarity to the operators as well. This is one part of it. And next, we'll talk about a couple uses that we're proposing adding to the PD district for light industrial that capture the larger scale microbreweries so that there is a path to review and approval for those. And the 10% in there for the total square footage is there because we looked at this over the past few years at examples in Franklin. So what we're proposing now really reflects what's in practice out there.
Can I ask why the things are not on our,
I think it's because we uploaded a PowerPoint instead of a PDF copy of a PowerPoint. So we'll make sure we get that sent out to you tomorrow. Civic Clerk doesn't accept PowerPoints always, and we just didn't catch that.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I've got a short question here. This is on the first bullet point right here. When we say 10% of the total square footage, I know that there's a microbrew in the Cool Springs area that actually has an interior second floor. So does that count for part of the total square footage, or is it just the first floor layout?
It would be whatever is calculated in terms of what the square footage of the building is. So it would include the second story.
Okay.
But we looked at that one as part of the study too.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So I mentioned this just a moment ago. This one is the idea of adding light industrial and general warehousing uses to the list of potential use types for the PD district. This responds to some trends about maker spaces and artisanal manufacturing where they're making maybe craft soaps or handbags or something like that that still might fall under the light industrial category, but it's light. And that would allow for a path for that in some commercial areas. We're also seeing some changes in retail with general warehousing, where the product is stored on site, but the transaction occurs online or off-site, and the storage area is larger than the retail interface, which might be fairly small. So then that kicks it into the general warehousing category, making that industrial. So this allows for that type of use to also be in commercial areas.
I want us to keep very careful. For example, your light industrial was something that was really, really a big deal in my area that I lived in when I was in Albany, because light industrial incorporates or did, and it's really changing. Alderman, I didn't have to really investigate this, and it was very intrusive. Because light industrial, the scope and span of it is very, very large. So, we're talking about warehouses and little storage and all that, but there is a total different end to this, so we just need to be very careful about that. Because it involves big trucks and gravel and dust and noise.
And snails.
Very careful. Yes, thank you very much. Snails.
Or emissions. So is there a clarification between a larger light industrial versus a maker space, which I'm finding out is becoming a popular phrase when you talk about a maker space, because there is a lot of online transaction. There are people that do make soap. They make, there's a guy down in Columbia that makes fountain pens, and they're referred to as makers, or and so that's a smaller scale, almost the outgrowth of almost the outgrowth of a hobby that's become a business. And because the internet is so far-reaching, in some cases, they've become very big businesses. But
What we could do is lay out some characteristics that they would need to provide, what those are as part of the approval process, so that when you think you're approving a business that makes soaps, you're not approving a business that manufactures wire, so that is very limited in the request and approval of it. We could handle it like that.
okay.
And this is specifically to the PD district, so you would be seeing these on the front end with the development plan. And if we added that criteria about the characteristics, you will see all that before you approve it.
Again, I think it's a worthy consideration to add, because spaces like this might lend themselves toward like a space at the factory, or even in the reconstruction of or redevelopment of the areas around the factory. And they end up, not being obtrusive to the neighborhood, but they provide employment for other people, and so I think it's a good idea. Yes, Alderman.
Yeah, it's almost like I want some elements that are in CI. I think specifically about Armistead, for example, I think there's a trigger in there for some of this too, but there's an educational component, there's a smaller component, it's all about the experience, it's about taking that farm to table to another level, and I think that kind of stuff, to Commissioner Allen's point, if I think about, Aspen Grove and the area over there, that large spaces in light industrial, that's not what I would picture in a PD, but I could really see a cool maker space that's part of that experience of that development that they're trying to create. And so I don't know if there's a way to, I know we can get really complicated there, so I don't, but I do think it's a tamed down version versus a true industrial. So.
Good point. Any other questions, comments? Okay.
This is all really great feedback. Thank you all. The next one is infill in existing commercial shopping centers. As another potential best practice, staff's bringing forth some additional flexibility to promote infill in existing commercial shopping centers that tend to have buildings set very far back from the street with expansive surface parking lots in front of them. And new infill is encouraged there.
Right.
So this amendment would clarify that the existing buildings in the shopping center could remain in their non-conforming status for frontage and building type and where the parking is located, and apply that just to the new infill building. And it would also clarify that an internal drive from the new building to the public street would be required, so that you'd have sidewalks and street trees to the new building. So it sort of encourages infill at the public street first, moving back into the site. So we wanted to get your feedback on that.
I think this makes sense because there's, changing trends of kind of what we're seeing in retail, and there probably will be opportunity in the future for this to apply to a few spaces around us.
But they could still be on a private street inside the area.
Yes, yes.
It wouldn't have to be
City
where the
maintenance.
collector goes by or anything.
It just adds some more flexibility.
We've done it before in Cool Springs area though, with many, and it makes sense, and you can go like to the Jim and Nick's and all those new ones that they had all of that parking and the opportunity to have some more businesses there that you could be able to shop at. Well, I mean, that made sense to me, and I think it's a good thing.
Okay, Alderman Baggett.
I think I thought about Cool Springs and the mall. I think that was here a while back. I think if there's something in here that we could encourage those somehow those internal streets to create new placemaking, so we don't have these. I think a comment I made on the mall was there's just a new row of big box stores that was around the exterior perimeter, and it doesn't really encourage kind of what you see a bit here on this. I guess that's the Target shopping center on Columbia, but yeah, if it's crafted so that infill creates these walkable streets, is that the kind of what this is going for?
Yes, it is.
Oh, very good. I am in favor.
Yeah, if you look at the diagram. Yeah, if you look at the diagram, the blue lines really would show where the new internal drives that need to have sidewalks and street trees and things like that would be, with the buildings fronting those. But then the existing buildings don't necessarily have to change or have any ramifications to them.
And this is, just from this example, these separate new structures that are across the parking lot, essentially from the original structure, kind of like the Waffle House at Lowe's, or the couple of restaurants and mattress shop in that front that are across the parking lot from Lowe's. Kind of a scenario like that. I know there's, because we had talked about this, that it doesn't apply so much to Cool Springs Galleria, a big mall, as it does more to a big box shopping center like a Walmart or a Walgreens or a Lowe's or something like that.
Yeah, it applies in both situations, but it has a lot more, it allows more flexibility in some of our existing shopping centers that are more strip kind of type retail today. That's where we have seen the flexibility more needed. But I would say that things like where the Waffle House or the Jim and Nick's are today, our zoning ordinance that was adopted in 2019 did add additional standards over what was in place at the time those were approved. So we do encourage more placemaking and really creating more of an internal experience than we did at that time. So it does allow for infill, but it also adds some requirements to make the experience a little more pleasing for the people going to the businesses.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I do a follow-up question on that,
Yes.
please? When you are looking into the future on this, and as we're looking at the diagram that you just mentioned, the existing structures, the diagram doesn't show any connectivity on that. So would there be some requirement or encouragement, or what's staff's plan to have that connection happen? Regarding sidewalks and or painting certain areas for walkability, because I like what Alderman Baggett was referencing right there, but I don't know how you're connecting everything else.
Yeah, it allows for incremental change in these potential standards. So if a new building, I don't have a laser, well, maybe this will work. Nope, it won't. If a new building goes in, it would need to have that kind of internal street frontage in front of the building and all the way back out to the public street. So you'd be able, in theory, to walk from the public street down the internal drive with sidewalks and street trees to that new building. It does allow more flexibility just to keep the existing as it is, but eventually it might, and we will encourage the applicants to master plan. It eventually may fill in with new buildings and potentially parking structures and really creating a walkable mixed use environment.
And we'd certainly encourage those connections, but even under today's ordinance, it depends on the limits of disturbance of the site to a point and where we can make comments. And so we definitely encourage that. And if anything comes in with a PD, we can address the whole site more holistically. But I agree with Kelly. It is going to incentivize more spillover of redevelopment in an incremental approach.
Okay. Other comments, questions? Okay.
All right, so the last major topic is FEMA floodplain, and I'm going to turn it over to Shannon.
Thank you. So the long-awaited maps, flood maps, are finally finalized through FEMA. We received notice June 20th that they had been finalized, so we have until December 20th to get these adopted. So this falls in line with our ordinance update. We tried to give you a snip of the entire area to show the changes. There's not any major changes in depths of the floodplain. There are some changes in increase in floodway in a few spots, decreases in floodway in a few spots. Yeah, you can flip through. I know you have had some trouble viewing your PDF, so I don't. And it was a little bit of a challenge to get these where they were somewhat visible for you to see.
There are some floodway increases too.
Yes, ma'am. There's some increases and some decreases.
Looks like a lot of it is kind of push one side to the other, that kind of stuff. A lot of it is trade-off. The two biggest ones I saw, obviously, around the new Southeast Park, a lot of increase down there. And then there was one area I didn't quite understand. I think I read most of these okay, is right there, right next to Hunter's Bend, in the middle of a neighborhood, there's a pretty significant increase. It just seems, I'm trying to figure out, I guess I didn't realize there was an issue there. And it also, I'm trying to figure out how it even gets there and not other places. Right off of Hillsborough there, right north of the fields, right by Hunter's Bend.
Hunter's Bend has flooded up to the building before, but never flooded the
Yeah,
building.
this is clear into that neighborhood that's on the north end of that.
So in 2010, there was a bunch of flooding up in that
Was
area.
there? Past the school, north of the school?
Not north of the school, no.
Yeah, this shows a fairly, a couple blocks of neighborhood there that's now filled in as an increase, so I just. Anyway, those are the only two places that I thought were kind of weird anomalies, but other than that,
Yeah, I see what you're saying now.
There are a bunch of them on South Corruption. Close to South Corruption.
And there are some letter of map revisions that have been approved that are not implemented into these maps. FEMA's process on getting these maps done, we've had several revisions come through during that time that were not included in these maps.
Right. And these are historic changes that are not significant enough to require a change in the map itself. So FEMA issues, along with the whole package, they issue this package of
Revalidation.
letters of map. It's a revalidation letter. It says, we've looked at these letters of map revision, and they still stand, they still apply, they're still in effect, they still don't mandate a change in the map, but the revalidation letter is just, it's an enormous stack of, the one I got in the spring of this year had maybe 1,000 letters of map revision.
Ours is not that long, thankfully.
So that stands. The other thing is that in June, what the mayor received, was a letter of final determination,
Right.
an LFD. And that LFD starts that 180-day clock, and the mandate is that your city governing board adopt those new maps before that 180 days is up.
Yes.
And it's a hard deadline, because
Yes.
the failure to meet that deadline throws you immediately into a situation where your flood insurance program is at risk. So
Yes.
it bears watching the calendar, so.
Mr. Chair?
is-
Oh,
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was only going to mention the timeline,
Yeah,
because
I-
that's a great segue, but
I
if you have
got a
comment.
couple more questions. You mentioned these, like the stack of revisions that were, you received that were, what you said, verified or validated? What was it you said?
They're just essentially FEMA saying, we processed, at some point historically, we processed a letter of map change somewhere.
Yeah.
A letter of map, a LOMR F, a LOMR.
Or would
and-
you get, do you get letters that don't, that if it is not maintained, or if they say these LOMRs were not revalidated on the new map, do we get letters that say that?
Yes, the letter that we received has a list of letter map revisions that are being revalidated, and then a short list of letter of map revisions that are being superseded by the map.
By the new maps themselves.
And what do we do with those letters that are being superseded? Or the property, do we let those property owners know that their LOMR was no longer valid? Or how, what is the expectation of FEMA for a property? How are they notified that were once out of the floodway because they did a LOMR, and now they're now in the floodway, and they maybe find out because somebody was looking at maps?
Yeah. And, I mean, it's appropriate to notify, and I'm not sure, because we've got a specific ordinance that says that if somebody gets mapped in or out of the floodplain, it changes their flood status, then we send them a letter. And just say that your property status has changed, you're now, I sent 400 letters out early this year to people that were mapped into the floodplain for the first time.
Do we have that kind of ordinance in Franklin?
We have not historically sent out individual letters about specific changes to specific properties. We actually are trying to get sent out next week, over 1,200 letters that are notifying of the maps going into effect in December, and different just floodplain information. There is the 90-day notification is put in the newspaper, but we have not historically sent out individual letters.
I think we should look into that. It sounds like Nashville's doing it. And I think that that would be a good thing if my house was not in a floodway, because I paid an engineer to do a LOMR, and then all of a sudden, a LOMR,
Right.
and all of a sudden the new map comes out, and now I'm in it.
Yeah.
I think that's
And there's almost less of that than there is. In our case, we were issuing 18 new map panels, and these were largely tributaries to other creeks that had never been modeled or mapped before.
Yeah.
And so these were people, if they didn't get a letter from me saying, hey, you're mapped into the floodplain, they would certainly get a letter from their mortgage company at the end of the year saying, hey, you're now in the floodplain, and now you have to carry flood insurance. And so
no,
that's
I would
part of
agree.
the purpose.
The other thing is, how does the additional floodways on the Southeast Park, I'm glad Alderman Brown brought that up, how does that impact the plant design and what we're going to do down there? And I wonder how does that impact the Southeast plant and park? Because we really can't touch, floodway in our ordinance, but now we've got two going straight through the Southeast Park.
Well, again, part of this that's being reflected does not incorporate some of the letter of map revisions that have already been approved that has changed some of that.
So do you think that one is one of those?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Um,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to touch on the letters. We do send out letters for rezonings. So when we bring forward the FFO and the FWO rezoning so that those lines match the FEMA maps, we'll send out letters for that. Not we haven't necessarily done it for Lomars, but for the actual change to the zoning map, we will send out letters of notification in advance of the Planning Commission meeting.
So, and going back to what the Alderman was saying, that, you know, that is a great idea, but if that is something that's gonna be a new process or a new task for planning to take on though, I do think that's something though that should, which is gonna be more money, that is something that I think though that would have to come from administration with either new people, a new person, or a new process, but also money. Because that would be a task and a half, I would think. Because if that's something that you do, or but that is something, that is a process.
Right.
That is something that would have to go through, because if you're talking to staff and letters, that's something that has to go through, you're gonna have to verify where you're in, now you're out, or you weren't, or you're not. That's a whole budgetary thing too. Although I think that is worthy, that's something probably, but that's a whole new something, that's money attached, so, yeah. I would think.
So who do the hundreds of letters go to that you sent out?
They are going out to all the properties that have any FFO or FWO on them, minus city-owned properties.
And that's a public outreach, kind of, you get CRS credit for that.
Yes, sir.
And I do too. In fact, I'm frantically trying to get 12,000 letters out in the next week or so. So, and we do it every year. We notify people, hey, you know, your property is in the floodplain or in floodway, and it contains a whole series of it contains information about what you can and can't do in the floodplain. It talks about your risk, you know, what your risk is. You are in the floodplain. If your house is paid for and you're not required by a mortgage company to carry flood insurance, these are the reasons you should carry flood insurance. And it talks a lot about, you know, the kinds of things that we want people living in the floodplain to know about what their risk is, what their obligations are, what their limitations are to what they can do with the property, and those kinds of things. So
Yes, and the letters that are going out, they don't just address that we're getting new maps. There's 3 different inserts into the mailer that's about the new maps, and then on flood preparedness.
Yep.
Do we get CRS credit for that?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, any kind of, those kind of flood mailers and stuff, I'm working with our public relations people right now on which months we can do a bill stuffer, or you know, just, or a notice that something's on our Facebook page, or those kinds of things. All of that counts for CRS credit.
Yes, and as we've just finished our CRS cycle visit, we have just finished making sure that the library has all of the up-to-date information and so forth as well.
Right. Yep. Other questions? I know this is a long-awaited event to finally
indeed.
get these flood maps finished. Okay.
So we'll be back next month at the Joint Conceptual Workshop with the full overview of all the topics that are being brought forward
Okay.
this fall for the 5-year zoning update. And then because of that time frame that we need to get this adopted by the end of the year, we'll be going to Planning Commission in October, then on to first reading through third reading in November and December for a January 1 effective date.
Okay. Great, thank you. All right. The next item on our agenda tonight is a continued discussion of an Envision Franklin Plan update request for 354 Franklin Road, the Roper's Knob property. So, Greg?
Good evening, and thank you very much. This application is for 354 Franklin Road, which is the large 200-acre tract located between Franklin Road, Mac Hatcher, and Cool Springs Boulevard. Throughout the Envision Franklin update, the staff heard a community desire to continue to protect the Franklin Road corridor, and this property was designated as the Rural Reserve design concept as part of that update. And that supports half-acre lots and 50% preserved open space. It also supports potentially civic and institutional uses. The property is also zoned estate residential, which allows 2-acre residential lots. The applicant is requesting a change to Village Green with a special consideration. And they're also requesting to reduce the conservation area on the property. The staff does not believe that this request meets the review criteria established by Envision Franklin to support this amendment. The staff also has major concerns about such a significant land use change for this location. Presenting plan amendments at the joint conceptual workshop is not a required step. This was suggested by the applicant. So the staff and the applicant would appreciate as direct feedback as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Greg?
I don't know if this is going to be tall enough. Y'all hear me okay? All right, there we go. That's better. Hi, my name is Greg Gamble, and I'm representing the applicant and the owner of this property located at 354 Franklin Road. We're here tonight at the Joint Conceptual Workshop to open up a conversation. We're very interested in hearing from Franklin's leadership as it relates to this property. During the Envision Franklin draft process, the neighbor changed on this property. The city of Franklin now owns the hard corner of Franklin Road and Mac Hatcher Parkway. You'll notice that the railroad goes right through the middle of the property that the city now owns. So the city owns both sides of the railroad. That was an effort done to preserve the rural character that we love as we drive down Franklin Road. And it's pretty important. It's pretty special. In this presentation, you'll see that our proposed plan really complements that effort, complements and really speaks to a lot of the conversations that have been had over the past several months. If you'll go to the next slide, oh, I'm in control. Maybe. There we go. Thank you. I'm just going to let you turn. Is that okay? All right, I'll just let you know. This is a due diligence map that we put together that shows the constraints of the property. You'll notice that Spencer Creek has floodway and floodplain that cross this property. It's kind of on the north section there. The yellow line that you see on this map shows the HHO. This is the Hilltop Hillside Overlay Protection. The red line that you see is the Hilltop Hillside Overlay Buffer. That's a 500-foot offset. So any naturally occurring slopes that are within that 500-foot offset are also protected. You'll notice to the bottom right of the screen, you'll see Roper's Knob property that is owned by the state of Tennessee, and then 2 properties adjacent to it that are owned by the city of Franklin. The property owner understands the historical significance of Roper's Knob, understands its role in the Battle of Franklin and the Civil War here in Franklin. Understands that there's an opportunity to truly create something special for this property. We had a neighborhood meeting a couple of months ago over at the factory where we invited not just the adjacent property owners to this property, but other stakeholders here in Franklin, members of the Historic Zoning Commission, members of the Heritage Foundation, and asked for their input at the factory. As Andrew pointed out, the current policy in Envision Franklin on this property is rural reserve. Rural reserve requires a development pattern of half-acre lots and 50% open space preservation. And I will tell you that from the due diligence map, we have approximately 70% open space that is a part of the HHO floodplain floodway on the property now. But the pattern of development for half-acre lots, we wanted to know what the neighbors and stakeholders thought about that development pattern for this property. The next slide. Thank you. We had a lot of mixed opinions. We had a lot of comments saying no development. We had 0 comments or support for the half-acre lot subdivision. There were positive comments regarding clustered, compact, small footprint development patterns. On the next page, the community preferences included the conservation of land, small development footprint, preservation of Franklin Road, preserving the rural gateway. There is already a special consideration associated with this property that no new development should occur within 150 feet of Franklin Road and Machatcher Parkway. So that buffer, that scenic corridor buffer is already included there. And along Franklin Road, that 150 feet extends beyond the railroad track. So I know as you drive down Franklin Road, the railroad kind of sits up in the air. So that land that would be between Franklin Road and the railroad track would remain preserved. Trails, adding public access, getting mountain bike trails, walking trails, hiking trails along the hills was important from the community input that we had, and access to Roper's Knob was important. There were mixed opinions on whether there should be mixed use. In other words, a place where people could have sundries or a small restaurant or kind of engaging the street and outdoor dining in a different way versus no commercial at all. So that was kind of a mixed bag. There was a mixture between no development at all versus cluster development. No development at all versus providing housing within that missing middle that we've been talking so much about as a community. Okay. There was support for mixed-use building type, commercial on the ground floor with residential above. There were also several that said none of these, so a bit of a mixture there. On the next slide, there was more support for the clustered development with open space preservation and open space preserved in a meaningful way versus the half-acre lot subdivision. Okay. There was very little support for traditional style architecture, traditional townhomes, traditional single-family homes that we would see in our neighborhoods here in Franklin. There was a lot more support for architecture with special character, with unique design style and kind of more of a traditional architectural character. Okay. We would like to discuss the new policy of Village Green, and this is really a placemaking policy. This is a policy that allows for a mixture of architectural types. It allows for more of a Main Street neighborhood commercial ground floor, providing a destination. We had a lot of interest from neighbors who were nearby, who were close by, saying, I would like to be able to walk to a restaurant. I'd like to be able to walk to a coffee shop. I could see us engaging that. One of our biggest concerns is about traffic. How do we handle additional traffic on Franklin Road? How do we, and what would you anticipate for, in terms of a traffic study and road improvements? Obviously, I don't have those answers today, and we know that with any plan that's being proposed, traffic study, traffic analysis, offsite road improvements, all of those things are critical to plan support. This is the concept plan that we've introduced to have this discussion. The predominant development area is along Franklin Road over on the far west side of the property. Right now, there is a driveway that does cross over the railroad tracks and connects to Franklin Road. It does not align with the Harlansdale Manor roadway. And so city engineering is saying, we'd like to see a road, but we'd like to see you align it with Harlansdale Manor's road. There is some concern by Harlansdale Manor residents about traffic volumes, and we would certainly anticipate and expect to have some level of road improvement in order to make a connection like this work. Along Ash Drive, which is along the southern boundary, this property does connect or does touch the right-of-way of Ash Drive to the south. there was a lot of concern by residents that are in this neighborhood that there are no sidewalks on their streets. There are no curb and gutter on their streets. They were concerned about what happens if you introduce a public street connection in this particular location, and are you going to get cut through traffic to Liberty Pike, and how appropriate is that? So that is comments that we heard from the community. Coming in then off of McHatcher Parkway at Cool Springs Boulevard, that entrance drive is there today. When you go by, you see kind of the gates, or it's fenced off. In talking with planning staff, they said at that location, you need something special. There needs to really be something special there. We think that that's a perfect opportunity to introduce a trailhead, a small pavilion that could be a storm shelter, something that becomes an architectural feature and icon that introduces you to the pedestrian nature trails and walking trails for this Roper's Knob area. So we think that that could be special as well. On the next page, we think that this area that is on the west side, adjacent to Franklin Road, just over the railroad track, could be a very excellent example of placemaking opportunities here in Franklin using the village green, creating a streetscape, on-street parking, walkability, letting this be kind of the commercial of the ski slopes down at the bottom of the hill for people who are coming and engaging with Roper's Knob and understanding and learning about the history of Franklin. Here's an opportunity to complement Cool Springs, to complement a lot of the new kind of inventive planning that we've been looking at here in Franklin. On the next slide, this is a perspective rendering looking from McHatcher and Franklin Road. I wanted to show you the relationship of this development footprint, which occupies about 55 acres out of 200 acres, and what really this preservation opportunity is here at Roper's Knob and down in the valley. When you're driving along Franklin Road, headed back into downtown Franklin, this development isn't visible. It's below the railroad tracks. It sits too low in elevation to be able to see it. The line along the hill that you can see from Franklin Road is well above this proposed development. Okay. If you will go back to the proposed master plan for me, a couple of slides there. So as Andrew mentioned, we are proposing a shift in the HHO line. And the HHO line, when it was first established, I think 2009, is that right, Kelly? 2008. This area right in through here followed a tree line through this area. There is about a 60-foot drop in elevation from this HHO line elevation here to this elevation that's down here. The HHO lines in Franklin don't necessarily follow a contour line. They follow contours, they follow tree lines, they react to roadway infrastructure where it's existing. There is about a 75-foot drop in elevation from where you know the cliffs are along McHatcher Parkway to this lower area. So it's following the view line that you can see from these roads. So if you're on McHatcher Parkway, the view line and that elevation that you see where the HHO is established may be completely different than if you're over on Franklin Road and you get to see a different view line. So the HHO lines are kind of going up and down the terrain, following what you can see and what you perceive from the different arterial roads. This area right in through here was manipulated. It was graded. Today, when you look at an aerial photograph and the... I'm sorry, say that again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this area right in through here. There's now, this line, this existing HHO line now goes out over a football field. There's a barn that sits in the HHO that has been constructed there after, I think, the 2008 date. So there were changes that occurred in this area. We've walked this several times. There's an existing tree line that's right through here. And to us, that really feels like the break in the hill, like the part that hasn't been graded, that hasn't been touched from there going forward. And we're asking for your consideration to allow those graded areas of the site to be included in the development. Along McHatcher Parkway then, also additional grading has taken place. Tree line had been removed in this area. There's now a new Mallory Valley water line that goes through that area. And so we're asking for your contemplation here that HHO really now respond to the existing terrain and topography. If you'll go back to the first due diligence map that I showed, I think I can explain that in more detail. This is really a two-part discussion. So on this map, can you see this better, commissioners, on your screen? Is that okay? This area right here, you can see how it was incorporated into development. Right here is the football field. That area was flattened out, and then this area up to the tree line was regraded. You can see the barn right here. Along this edge here where the tree line is, you can see the road, the drive that was put in, installed, and a lot of the kind of the grading and disturbed activity in that location as well. I think I'd really enjoy having kind of a two-part conversation, if it's okay. The first is about the policy of the property. And as Answer mentioned, the existing zoning on the property today is estate residential. This property can be subdivided and homes can be built on it, and it can be developed with lots that are greater than 2 acres in size. The existing land use policy is for a subdivision of half-acre lots. We believe that with the city's new investment in this as our neighbor, that there's something special here. There's something that could be very unique here. I'm not interested in now in just kind of hearing your thoughts and comments and what would be worth pursuing.
Before we get too far into this, I have a
Sure.
question, because I've seen two views from Franklin Road. My question is, standing on Cedar Drive, you know where Cedar Drive is, right? What's the view from Cedar Drive? What's the view looking up from Cedar Drive? Because we're talking about hill.
Can you go to our
talking about
master plan?
Protecting the hill, the view shed, okay? So we talked about protecting it from Franklin Road.
Yeah.
We talked about protecting it from McHatcher. What about protecting from Liberty Pike or say Cedar Drive or Walnut Drive?
This whole tree line, all this tree mass that's in here would remain. It'd be preserved.
Okay. One other question.
Does it
When
work?
we talk about walkability and people wanting to enjoy, people from Aspen Grove want to enjoy this and all of that. What about the noise from someone living on Ash Drive? What kind of noise, what kind of impact does someone on Ash Drive have, would this development have? Because now we're talking about if you're gonna move it to this football field there, what kind of impact would someone living, say, on Ash Drive, what kind of impact
Sure.
do they have as far as lights, as far as, light pollution, noise pollution, what kind of impact would this have on them? Because now we're talking about, because before we were talking about being way over in the field, now we're talking about being right there.
There's not a buffer required right now in our zoning ordinance, but from residential to residential. But we have a buffer here that's between 75 and 250 feet. And that's the existing tree line that would remain. This plan that we're showing you is conceptual. Somebody could walk in with a different plan tomorrow, potentially. But we have to show a concept plan to illustrate what this village green concept could look like. We believe that it's most appropriate to have single-family detached lots transitioning to single-family detached lots. To have townhomes that would be abruptly transitioning to those single families would not be appropriate. We also believe that that the clustered missing middle homes, whether they be condominiums or a condominium over a retail store or live work, as we talked about tonight, that those would be much more appropriate closer to the railroad tracks, closer to Franklin Road, up closer to the city of Franklin's property, closer to that that northern area.
So that the view will still be protected from it.
View would be protected. I believe that noise would be very limited.
Okay, that was because the noise I was really kind of.
Right.
Alderman.
About the noise, you're talking about close to the railroad now. I'm hearing the railroad, the trains coming, kind of right across 3rd Avenue and everything. So I'm assuming they're going to be keeping on going.
I would assume 2 to 3 times a day, except for they don't run on weekends, I don't believe, but during the week they certainly do.
Can you make those railroads run quieter?
Yes. Work on that.
Other questions? Alderman Baggett.
So I think this is a general comment. Number one, well, 2 comments. One is a general comment, one's more specific. The more specific one is that the hilltop, I was just looking at Google Earth and there's some historical photos from satellite. This was manipulated. The land was manipulated at some point over time. It's hard to tell if it was
By a previous owner.
by a previous owner.
Right.
Before, it's hard to tell if it was before or after the hillside overlay. I think that probably the information could be obtained.
It was after.
Yeah, it was out.
It was
Probably
after.
after,
There you go.
yeah.
So I think that that comes to mind. The second thing is that we're on this Village Green. We've been brought a few of these, a couple of them, and I think staff. My only comment here would be is it's going to be Village Green is designed, and it should be designed to allow for lots of different uses. That's the whole idea of 70% open space, 30% development area, and creativity within the 30%. What I think we're going to find is, and we've already experienced this, is when we require the Envision Franklin Amendment ahead of a development plan, because of the maximum amount of flexibility that's allowed, or not, maximum's not the right word, because of the broad flexibility allowed within Village Green for different types and uses, and you're going to get. And though we have this plan here, and it's conceptual, I think it's going to become more important for us to. There's another plan I think you all are going to look at tonight that is further along in specifics of what they're going to do in Village Green, and so I really think that the first few of the. I mean, I don't know if we can look at that process, but I think changing this to Village Green without having a more concrete understanding of what the development plan is, just from a decision make, is hard, and I think it's going to continue to be hard. And I would like to see these come through with a development plan in tandem. And I know that is a departure from how we've done things, but when we're sitting here thinking, if we move this to Village Green, and the current property owner decides to sell the property, but it's got, Envision Franklin establishes Village Green, and the next property owner comes in and we've made the decision to change it, not based on, there's so much latitude in Village Green. I just would ask that maybe staff consider that on this particular land use type that we would allow some flexibility, because I think we're going to get hung up, quite frankly, on the Village Green concepts and public misunderstanding of possibly what could be allowed, and maybe some hesitancy from some on the board and planning commission of allowing it, going ahead and adopting it when there is such broad flexibility, which is good, which is how we get to the preservation of the land. So that would be my one comment, is that I know this is conceptual. I'm not like blown away by it, but I think that if there was steps taken to, I love the concept though, that we have 70% open space and development that occurs here. But the public is now saying that this is going to be a commercial development. And it's what we know that is not the case, because that's not what Village Green does. So if it came through with a development plan that has specific uses and building types and heights and more specifics, I think it would be better for us. But right now, that's not possible in the way we allow these to come through, because staff is making applicants come through with the Envision Franklin Amendment based on concepts.
Right.
And so we're sitting here kind of in this nebulous, what if with some drawings. So that would be my general statement on Village Green specifically. I'm not talking about necessarily any of the character areas. We're just going to have some of these nuances that I think the public will love Village Green, and they do. But also there's an element of uncertainty that I think we should just be aware of, that maybe that adding this all in one process might help.
If I could interject, there is a special consideration that the applicant submitted as part of their submittal, which would help further refine what that vision is, and they did include that it would be kind of a town center. Now, the special considerations can be much more specific. We've had some in the past that have been very tailored to the site, so even a change in ownership would still be beholden to that special consideration. So we didn't really get into the particulars, but that is part of the proposal, and Alderman Baggett, to address some of those concerns, could be more specific.
And that would be
to
all
avoid
right. I don't
changes.
want us to have special considerations that are page long because of the specificity that I think we would want in some, like, for instance, I'm not thrilled about anything going on Franklin Road because this exits out to Cool Springs Boulevard, and I want to protect the character of Franklin Road. I'm not thrilled about anything coming out onto Ash Drive either. And so that's where these particular kinds of properties that could actually use Village Green, we're going to be really limited in our vision without seeing maybe more specific plans. I think it would help the applicant too if they could come through with a development plan all at the same time. I don't know, just room for discussion for staff and other people other than me, but that's where I sit.
That's a big ask financially to go to that level
That's what I was
to
gonna
get
say.
it not approved.
That's what I was gonna say.
Well, it's a big ask to also take 6 months to go through a Envision Franklin amendment process. I think if you ask the development community, I think the trade-offs there, I don't know. I think that's a great question. Maybe the Development Services Advisory Committee could talk through that.
I think if you made it an option to either come in and ask for an Envision Franklin plan amendment or to do it simultaneously, I think that would probably be a win-win for both the development community and
I would add that the expectations of staff to review a development plan without a design concept in place in Envision Franklin makes our review nearly impossible. We are then providing professional recommendations not based in any plan or document. And so I do hesitate towards being able to provide professional recommendations without being based in a guiding document like Envision Franklin.
Well, but it would be based on Village Green, though. Like, in this case, they would be submitting.
We would be basing our review on Village Green, but we would not necessarily be supporting Village Green.
Understand.
So that we wouldn't be able to really make a full recommendation of approval or disapproval until you gave us guidance on what design concept it should be. So that's kind of why we have this process in place the way it is. This sets the stage for the policy so that we can then apply those policies during the development plan stage. We can definitely review in light of the zoning ordinance, but the land use policy would not be something we could consider at all. And that's what a lot of citizens generally really care about is the land use pattern, how those traffic impacts, how the land uses affect their neighborhoods. That's one reason we try to keep it high level with the Envision Franklin Plan Amendment to really strictly focus on the land uses and some preliminary layout to understand, but not get too much in detail until we've heard from the public and had some engagement.
I'm just not going to be supportive of a lot of commercial here. If any, it would be very, very minimal. I don't know that I'm supportive of the hillside change at all. I don't know that I'm supportive of the connections. You just see that I think everyone else could probably have another list of things they're not sure of. But I actually think Village Green is probably the best land use plan because of the latitude that it has to do other things that we're not seeing or,
Yeah. Other questions, comments?
I'll just
Yes.
say, I'm familiar with this area. I used to live in Hill Estates for about 5 years. And I think kind of my initial kind of reaction to this is, the kind of commercial aspect, I think, if any, very limited. And primarily just real big concerns about kind of connection and traffic, understanding that, okay, this is very close to Franklin Road, aligning roads, a lot makes sense, but with the commercial, not knowing how the impact, that could really put a quagmire on Franklin Road. I think that small amount of commercial, if it is there, does make sense making the connection to that Cool Springs intersection. I think because of that intersection would be the only reason I would ever be in favor of even a small amount of commercial there. Also, that whole Hill Estates, it's R4, it is a historic neighborhood. And so with that, I think kind of the, Village Green has a lot of different opportunities for it, but I think kind of the contrast of going into that, not just from lot sizes, but also from the product that we know will be built here. They're probably going to be at least, 500, 800,000 minimum for the tiny ones, probably like 1.2 something for that. You have houses and the other one that are, maybe 300, 400 if you're lucky, and like 1,050 square feet. So just that contrast, just from the product that we know that the Franklin market is holding right now to what has been built, that is extremely stark to me, that's going next door. I think too, that just for the hilltop overlay, with that, I could see, again, maybe extremely minimal, reacting to the existing structures that are there, but kind of moving that to kind of existing tree line that's there now, I don't think necessarily is the right kind of, visually what you're seeing on the site. Trees can be cut down, trees will die, trees can be regrown. So we have to think that once we give that up, it's never coming back. But when you have structures on there, maybe that is a little bit different. So the degree that that's changing, I'm not real keen on any of that. One thing I like is kind of the access to Roper's Knob trails. I think that would benefit everybody, not just that community, but everybody in Franklin. And then just in general, because we know, okay, this is very schematic, just again, that pairing of the density, kind of what's around it, and not even just Hill Estates, but like what's across the street, just everything kind of in this quadrant, with your probably highest density being, maybe when you get into Cool Springs a little bit right there. So just kind of where this is and placement, and just from the immediate adjacency, it's a kind of a contrast of densities to me.
Yep.
One last thing from it does look a little strange where it is and all that. It does. And the dumping out of the traffic on Ash Drive is a little bit much. I will add that. I didn't mean that. It'll be a little much.
We had recommendations to do pedestrian connection.
But I'm all for connectivity, so I will tell you that.
Yeah.
I will tell you that, because it does, the connectivity is needed, but that'll be a bit much for that area. I do think.
I don't know that you'll see it in
I
Franklin.
think Ann
You won't
had
see
her
it.
hand up first.
Yeah.
It's going to be tucked in that valley.
Yeah.
That's really why it's there, because it's down in that low valley area. It really is its own little enclave. Nobody would experience unless you're in it.
But I am concerned about commercial. I really am concerned about that.
Yeah. Mayor Moore?
I think Alderman Peterson.
No, you go
Okay.
ahead, please.
I'm not quite sure where to start because I'm not real happy
Okay.
with this particular project, and I date some of that unhappiness back to when they started chiseling the rock to open up Cool Springs Boulevard into that property, and the board learned that deals many years ago were made to allow some state residential lots there and also to have that access road. You're right, the neighbors have changed, but what we've bought is not going to change. I mean, there's nothing really going to happen on that. I'm struggling to understand how this is going to complement anything around it. I'm not really excited about the hilltop overlay changing. I think it's already been changed, and we didn't want it changed in reality. So I would be concerned about that. Your comment about the people that are visiting Roper's Knob are going to support the commercial, I find that a bit of a stretch because I don't think there are going to be large groves of people suddenly descending on the commercial from Roper's Knob, because it's not easy to get to, and it's always going to be a winding trail. It's never going to be a two-lane road that goes to the top of that. The city now is part of the property on the other side of the hill And so I think that's probably the vision on how you get to the Roper's Knob in the future. It's hard for me to want to support Village Green because I have no concept of what the traffic is going to do in this area. So not having traffic information makes me want to say no to the Village Green concept. So let's see. I've probably said enough and I'll stop.
Alderman Peterson?
Thank you for saying all those things, really, because I have had a number of people say to me, this is not what I was thinking about Roper's Knob. You know, I mean, it is a special area, and they'd like to see it kind of stay the way it is. And in fact, you know, we were describing over many years ago, the person who owned some of this property did some things, you know, and had some effects with it. But I do have a concern about several aspects of this. You know, we're talking about the traffic that would connect to Franklin Road, and the people in the area, and the ones that would be kind of, you know, across where that street would be extended, are not very happy to think about having some things right there with them, because the traffic is kind of bad enough, you know, the way it is now. But as I say, and also the idea of the Hill Estates aspect of that too. I mean, there are just a lot of houses and everything, you know, just back there, and it would have to have an effect on them. There's no question about that. And you know, just looking at how the city's bought so much over on the side toward McHatcher and everything, really makes me think that it probably, there are some aspects of it that shouldn't really be changed very much.
Thank you.
Didn't we just do Envision
Commissioner.
Franklin update?
I'm going to say, I've lived in this area the majority of my life, and I really wouldn't want to see anything there. But at that point, I mean, we know that something is going to be built there eventually, but I can't see the concept of the things that we've discussed tonight. So it's zoned a certain thing right now. So if you brought in a development based on current zoning, what would it look like? I mean, how many houses if they wanted to build residential up there, or what would we allow? We don't want anything there, but we know that's not achievable. That's impossible.
It's a state residential.
Yeah. So,
So
it'd be one unit.
The smallest lot size is 2 acre for a single family house. And yes, you could build a new road and have 2 to 10 acre lots.
Outside of the HHO.
Thank you for saying
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Before
one
that-
thing we haven't seen is, what would this look like if you created a development that conformed to the present standards? And that's Alderman Potts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm on slide 11, so I don't know how the TV wants to work this, but I'm going to work from the right side of the screen, which is closest to Cool Springs, back over to the left, which kind of goes from east to west. As I look at this, and I'll speak working across this, is the intersection of McHatcher and Cool Springs. It is enticing to possibly have some type of parking and we'll call it park access to Roper's Knob, right there at that intersection. I think it makes for good pedestrian connectivity because you've already got a large sidewalk that has that, is on that same side of the street there, along Mac Hatcher. So I do like that. As we now go to the west, when we're looking at the hillside overlay revision, even though the hillside overlay has changed, I am not in support of any type of commercial, retail, or residential development right there inside that nook where we can all see, it looks like about 4 to 5 buildings right there. I don't think I would ever be in support of something like that. I would actually ask us to try to reclaim that hillside overlay where a lot of that was removed that the mayor was talking about just a moment ago. You continue going west along that new access road to where the next intersection where it says HHO revision, and there was discussion or a presentation a moment ago about a football field or otherwise right there. I personally would kind of need to see a better map that showed what was the change previously, and is there an opportunity for us to, again, reclaim part of this overlay? Because I think Commissioner Allen and I believe that Commissioner McLemore also mentioned this is, we're never going to get this back. So is there an opportunity to reclaim some of this with trees and other vegetation? Now, that being said, continuing to the west, I do think with Village Green right here that there is an opportunity for small boutique style retail type store or restaurant in that area. It could be developed. I don't necessarily like the estate approach of 2 acre to 10 acre in that, but I would be open to seeing a different type of a plan. If you keep going west where you talk about the road, Mr. Gamble talks about the road that could intersect on Franklin Road. I think it would make more sense for it to align with the road on the opposite side of Franklin Road there. And then as we go south on this map, where this proposed road would then intersect with Ash Road, I did look at it and got the street view. You are going to have a lot of individuals who will figure out, oh, I can do a cut through all the way to Liberty, and I've got that concern. So, just at first glance, those are some of the things that, I either liked or have great concern about. I will go ahead and say we're not going to see, I don't think we'll see anything in the next 15 to 30 years as far as road improvement between this connectivity and Ash Road right there. And that road right there on Ash Drive, as it cuts across over to to Liberty in several different ways. It's a tight road. You're not going to have sidewalks there ever.
Nope.
And so, that is concerning, but if we are talking connectivity, we're really going to have to weigh that out. So, Mr. Chair, those are my thoughts. I appreciate the time.
I appreciate it.
One last question.
One last question.
How big are these lots that you showed diagrammed here?
They range in, do you mean the alley loaded? Or there's
Generally, like, are
65 to 70 foot wide if they're
quarter acre.
If there's no alley behind them, if there's an alley that's behind them, those are generally 50 foot.
What about the ones, are any of these anywhere, these are quarter acre, I mean, is that, no?
No, they're generally between 60 and 70 feet wide.
Okay, so to the mayor's point, the planning commission did just adopt an Envision Franklin, and they said y'all said one house per half acre here.
Mm-hmm.
That's what y'all said the vision was here. So that, I just want to be clear, what the vision wasn't estate residential.
Right.
It was one half. So I think we got to think about what is it going to look. It's still going to look similar to this lot layout, maybe outside the HHO, but it's going to be one house per half acre,
Right.
is what
Right.
y'all said you wanted. So I just wanted to point that out, that you're right, the planning commission did just pass Envision Franklin, and it said 1 house per half acre.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And where we had a house per half acre built any time in Franklin in years.
One-
Mr. Chair, I
One
just had another follow-up question. On the current proposal that we're looking at right here on these lots, townhomes, condos, these are for purchase, not for rent
That's
right
right.
now? Okay.
Hang on. Just a couple of points from myself. I watched the community meeting online, and I feel like, just based on the input from the community meeting, that there are enormous challenges to this project. And one of the ones that hasn't really been addressed here tonight, and I don't know where it stands since the community meeting, but the access to Franklin Road, from what I understood in the meeting, is at question. Whether the railroad will allow you to even
It's a concept
point.
plan.
put
Good
Right,
point.
yeah, I
an
don't know. We have to go to
access road
CSX.
across there. And if that's not the case, then this nice little village that's tucked in this valley is an enormous distance away from an access point, now Cool Springs Boulevard. The people on Ash Lane don't want anything to do with this. So the whole concept of connectivity to the south, plus coming in on Ash Road's not a, even if it was wider and there were sidewalks and there weren't children riding their tricycles in the street, that's not a legitimate way to access a new village filled with 800,000 to $1 million houses. So it becomes almost impossible to even get to this place. We've always wanted, there are a number of people on this planning commission that were part of a special plan dating back more than a decade, that met at the Presbyterian Church up by the Legends and said, what do we want to go on these 4 corners? And we already don't like what went on one corner. And thank you, City of Franklin, you've bought another corner, and we can live with the Methodist Church on a nice campus. So the whole point was that, as several commissioners have stated, back when that meeting took place, we were all like, we don't want anything to go on that corner. We respect the history associated with Roper's Knob, but the reality is that Roper's Knob is a relatively small piece of this, what's owned by the state and the city, and there's a far greater portion that's owned by the owner of this whole big parcel. So, big challenges. So, yes.
Harlansdale Court that's across Franklin Road, those lot sizes are a third to a half acre. That, I would love to see a layout in this, on the other side of the road, that would match up and agree with something like that. I think it'd be a lot more appropriate for the area, as opposed to having the smaller lots like you're showing. I think it'd be much more acceptable to all of us if something's going to be built there.
And just
And I think that goes to the whole point that from my perspective, when I looked at this in that planning meeting, there was a sense that this property was privately owned by a person who wants to understand the zoning rights, the zoning requirements, and the rights that he has to put something on a piece of property that he owns. And so we're looking for something that's amenable to many, to most. It's an appropriate development. That's a Harlansdale Court. That's a very attractive little cul-de-sac development. So anyway, just looking for something that is amenable to many. We are out of time. Is there anyone that wants to make a final comment or question?
I was just going to make just one thing about the roads and that existing Hill Estates. They are very narrow. There's a lot of people that park on the streets, and so usually there's gravel in there everywhere, and so even 2 cars passing there, you often have to wait. So I don't see any of those roads anywhere in that division being able to handle any extra traffic. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We're adjourned.